fiction. Each one of their lords has
They crossed the line, this is a straight up violation. Now they force my hand, there's no other course but annihilation. The house of Extra-B is guilty of evil sacrilege and dabbling in science that threatens the very way we live. See, this is not the first time, and this is not the first house, and this is not the first fire. We had to go and stomp out, we gotta take the scorched earth route and scatter atoms to the wind, so we'll be sure there'll never be some doubt. But don't be overconfident, these extropians can be lethal. Their weapons are many, and for that reason, we might be equals, but none can match our savagery, unparalleled tenacity. We've killed entire bloodlines with some consider tragedy, but I think that it has to be this way, and this saves the fabric of reality and thus paves the way for the universe to carry out its cycle. The ultimate end of everything makes our life vital.
speak for the community. As extropian, the entropics act with impunity. Foolishly, they think they have the jurisdiction, and this notion we're beholden is the purest fiction. Each one of their lords has a weapon of mass destruction plus an enemy horde. They're called reapers, after death creatures, and I don't think that we have to respect either. We have the technological superiority and just enough intelligence to disrupt their order scheme. They're sorta mean, so keep your distance, and their defense is keen. Your shot attempts need precision. Cosmic progress is forbidden. Our study of unification isn't malicious, and they're trying to stop it. Why? So every option's on the table. To talk about the battle in stories, fables, and tales.
So rejoice because the battle will be glorious. The bloodlust, berserker rage, you bring the storm with us. This is the norm for us, crushed them till they're born to dust. Left to the extropians, we will be victorious.
We don't want a war, they're forcing us. They lust for battle, they don't even care if their war is just. Mourn for trust if war's on the cusp. The entropics will fall, we will be victorious.
So rejoice because the battle will be glorious. The bloodlust, berserker rage, you bring the storm with us. This is the norm for us, crushed them till they're born to dust. Left to the extropians, we will be victorious.
We don't want a war, they're forcing us. They lust for battle, they don't even care if their war is just. Mourn for trust if war's on the cusp. The entropics will fall, we will be victorious.
Five mass extinctions waiting on that sixth one. And if and when the next come, then maybe they'll be all done. What will be the catalyst? Will climate change establish it? Or will they kill each other with their nukes and all their battleships? Dying from embarrassment of being disagreeable monkeys ensures their banishment. I wonder will they vanish quick or linger on for centuries, grasping at the last straws and memories, huddled in their masses as they slowly freeze. Peace talkers, in reality they warmongers, gun-toting anger addict species full of death stalkers. Separated consciousness, they think outside the natural order, but all the while they are just animals prepared for the slaughter. Petty misanthropes with petty dreams and petty hopes. Seems the furthest they will go is peeping through their telescopes, float among the stars in this planetary ghetto. I wonder when the day will come when finally they let go. Look at all these humans, what they think they doing, completely unaware that they've been marked for execution, falling all to ruin. For power they're pursuing, they're choosing a straight path that's leading them to Ragnarok. Look at all these humans, what they think they doing, completely unaware that they've been marked for execution, falling all to ruin. For power they're pursuing, they're choosing a straight path that's leading them to Ragnarok.
I am the Black Plague, my tactics are medieval. The wave of death and destruction that crash into the people. I have to be lethal. As a biotic crisis, I have the power to seize you and leave your planet lifeless. A damaged tyrant that won't quit until man's panic is silenced. Remove the cancer of human with violence. What happens when society collapses? I turn into hopeless fear and dive into the masses. They try to plead like their species hasn't been next, like I care about the race and religion of insects. It's the apocalypse, you couldn't escape the doom on a rocket ship. The peak of humanity, I'm the opposite. An obstinate pocket of creatures I'm gobbling, reducing them back into stardust as I conquer them with a monster hymn. Their dominance Zeus is an afterthought, submerged in the fluidity of a cyclical flow as Ragnarok. Look at all these humans, what they think they doing, completely unaware that they've been marked for execution, falling all to ruin, for power they pursuing, they choosing a straight path leading them to Ragnarok. Look at all these humans, what they think they doing, completely unaware that they've been marked for execution, falling all to ruin, for power they pursuing, they choosing a straight path leading them to Ragnarok. Yeah. Yo. In the end, I'll be just beginning, raining flames down from the heavens, fire dousing many. War dirge, complete destruction with 4 words. The house of great, now it's your turn.
Just know that I exist in every clenched fist and angry word, destructive thought and hateful verb, meaning every action that's ever occurred that brings them ever closer to their heartbeat beating slower, to the time their body's slower than the hearse where I'm the chauffeur like a supernova.
Over 9 million species, blown into a vacuum overnight by just speaking. A completely avoidable fate, but this was the path that humans were reported to take. Great.
Blast wave, the day I come while I stroll among the ashes and burnt out buildings of a world not built to last. And howl out in laughter at the cost of this disaster. Let me welcome you to Ragnarok. There is no hereafter. Look at all these humans, what they think they doing, completely unaware that they've been marked for execution, falling all to ruin, for power they're pursuing. They're choosing a straight path that's leading them to Ragnarok.
Look at all these humans, what they think they doing, completely unaware that they've been marked for execution, falling all to ruin, for power they pursuing, they choosing a straight path leading them to Ragnarok.
My ultimate weapon was forged inside a dying sun. Its infinite mass can never be measured by tons. It warps space-time, colliding with the things that passes, ravaging planets, obliterating all of the smashes. Clashes cause the quantum light flash. Immense output of energy, the heat index is massive. Cosmic warlord addicted to drawing swords, an avatar that eats stars and leaves galaxies torn. I'm bioengineered to handle all these conflicts, swarming through the vacuum with at least 1 million starships. World split in half from the force of my wrath. Death to all extropians, they soaked in the bloodbath. Hammer versus the staff, destruction is our path. We arrived and collide on both sides, they get smashed. Order the attack, these cannons don't hold back. One blast makes the hull of their ship just go crack. Disorder, raise the flag for the slaughter. Decimate our enemies and everything they thought of. Overwhelming force till we knock them off course. None is safe when we engage in celestial wars. It's disorder, no defense against the horror. Everybody dies so we leave no one to mourn ya. Overwhelming force till we knock them off course. None is safe when we engage in celestial war.
Yeah, war trumpets for the poor hunted. My only purpose in combat is to express the gore function. More umbrage taken by these slavers. Me, I'm more offended by their able-bodied raiders. More ships than you can count. We run out of ammo before we get through the amount, so we'll draw them out. Deploying every force against our enemy. Engage in a war with Lord Entropy. I know him. He leads his troops in for answers. I know I'll have to face him and watch out for the hammer. Watch out. The battle cry will make a heart shatter. At least 1 million reapers versus simple star mappers. We'll take those odds and teach you to never underestimate the extropians, cause they go hard. So raise the shields. You either gonna bet on our unbeaten technology or take the field. It's unification defended by Thulian spaceships. Victory so close you can taste it. Every ship, every lord will be vanquished when it comes to celestial war. It's unification defended by Thulian spaceships. Victory so close you can taste it. You best be warned. None of this is safe if these two houses engage in celestial war. I tune into extropians on the losing end. Might be my last time to teleport to the moon again.
Too soon to grin, but we're expecting to win. Defenses getting shredded, they know their end will begin. That's we descend.
If I can make it to the base, then I'll initiate. It could destroy them all or create an entry gate.
Across my mind, the gray is nothing to lose. Initiating unification, so that's what I know we would choose.
Using the hyper staff, I triggered the final sequence. No one knows I'm in the lab, they'll have to find a cheated.
I'm suddenly heated, recalling all of the secrets. I know where he would hide, so I separate from the fleet ships. Hover the laboratory, jump off from like 100 stories.
Only a dead man would crash my lab with no type of warning.
Rise from the rubble, determined that I'ma stop this plot.
Who would dare show their face here like they call the shots?
What's up, everybody? Hopefully, everybody out doing pretty well. Just getting situated. Wanted to continue on the Thursday tradition of doing a majestic stream in which we discuss Omniversal block cosmology. So, I'm not sure if everybody out there is hearing me well or seeing me well, but hopefully, everybody is. I have the YouTube chat open. I am on Discord stage. I have sent out messages on all my social media accounts. Damn, I wish I could just do one click and send it out everywhere, but that's just not possible. So, yeah, this should be pretty fun. If you guys have any questions about anything that I am talking about, you guys are more than welcome to put it in the chat. Ask me in the chat on the stage if you are, because some people may not want to leave Discord in order to interact. So there's that too. I don't know how that affects the numbers. I don't really care. That's not really like the point of shows. It's not really to get numbers. It's really just to talk about OBC and really answer questions about people who are interested in it, or about things from people who are interested in it. And that's pretty much it. So, like, my attitude is not really, I want to, get the most amount of viewers on these particular streams. Although it would be nice because obviously, you have a scenario where, hey, I would love to be engaged with a lot of people. Absolutely, absolutely. So we're gonna get into this in a few seconds, but don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you can. Definitely got a bunch of stuff to get into today. We might actually do 2 shows today. I'm just gonna throw that out there. There may be a bunch of stuff we record for the Patreon. Oh, let me do my normal sort of Patreon plug. Thank you for the people who are subscribed to our Patreon. Really appreciate it. You guys keep the lights on. As far as I'm concerned, you guys may be the most important people of the business right now, in the fact that you're always consistently funding ideas, and so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We've started putting more stuff on Patreon. Like, a lot of these conversations have been recorded. We record a lot of these conversations, me and myself, and Tombstone. And so we are in the process of chopping up some of those videos because they're long, because we talk about OBC for hours on end, and getting that into somewhat of a reel or a short format to where you guys can hear us, just kind of really chop it up about OBC and everything that it entails and all the details and the questions that people may have about it and stuff like that. So, a couple of other things. Okay. Discord audio seems to be in close sync and being in sync with. Not quite. Yeah, I'm assuming it's going to be a little bit late, just because the YouTube is a little bit behind in sending it out and encoding it and decoding it, type of stuff. So I am going to get started. I want to start this off by kind of prefacing that this is not going to be a section specific conversation. I'm probably going to bounce around. I have a lot of thoughts that have been in my head about OBC for the last couple of days. I ended up writing a story about some thoughts that I lost when it came to OBC, and that story ended up being, Captain Hayes, how you doing? That story ended up being, I felt like, I don't know, Captain Hayes, how was that Oromufil story? First of all, did I read it okay? I felt like I had cotton mouth halfway through, and I fucked up my reading. But still, I am going to start reading a lot of stories Omnithology will be a physical or an ebook. It will be something like, you could obviously pick up the short stories of Omnithology, and they'll come in different issues and different themes and stuff like that. But Omniversal Block Cosmology is definitely coming in a book. And what actually inspired that is, this is my favorite book of all time. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's called Scientia. Scientia is my favorite book of all time. And I'll tell you why. First of all, I wrote a lot of type 1 out of this book. It's got so many things on just science and, general mechanics and just basic general info about the scientific world that I love to cross-reference my rhymes against. So if I'm thinking about flipping a rhyme in a certain way, and I'm like, oh, I want to use the word, matrix, right? Well, in this book, you can see I had it dog-eared, right there, because I was on the page of matrices and vectors. And of course, I wanted to be able to use the word matrix in the correct way. And so I did that for a lot of things in my rhymes in type 1 and type 2. And, as I got a little bit more speculative, I kind of went away from it a little bit, but that's only because I built such a foundation on the book of Scientia. So why am I saying all this? OBC is turning out to be my version and Majestic Comics' version of Scientia. And, Tombstone and myself have been working on this for, close to 2 years at this point. And we have kind of resigned ourselves to the understanding that we will most likely be working on this for the rest of our lives, because it's such a intricate model of thinking about fiction that you don't really know where the line between whether you believe it or not begins and ends. Like, there are times where I look at OBC and I'm like, man, this is a pretty insane model for reality. And then other times I'm like, well, this is a great model for fiction, great model for telling stories, but don't know if I believe it as reality. There are other times where I'm like, I'm not so sure. You know what I mean? Like, I'm legitimately not so sure. So, we can kind of get into some of these sort of concepts and things that I've had. First, there's one thing I guess we should probably kind of cover, and that is, I know there's going to be people who are going to attempt to disprove OBC as if it was meant to be taken, literally or, in real reality. And for that, I'll say I'm pretty flattered that the model is deep enough for someone to feel like they need to falsify it, right? But I know there's some hand waves that I take with OBC, right? Quintessence is the biggest one because I needed a immaterial substrate that actualized my thoughts on potential, right? And the probability of potential. And I combine those two, known as potentiality. I didn't combine those two. I just used the word that combines those two words of, probable and potential, right? And this idea of how probable is this potential, that being used as a state, whether quintessence can be in this particular state or not is the entire configuration of a block and blah, blah, blah. But yes, I understand that the giant hand wave that I make is quintessence, and I admit that on the onset. So this is not meant for someone to be like, haha, I got you. There's no such thing as quintessence. Well, there have been cultures throughout history that have described something like quintessence, and it, whether you want to accept it as literal truth or not, it's up to you. But it's something that I enjoy having not only fun with, but it's a great way of just parsing reality and trying to understand it at its most basic and innate level, bottom floor or top floor, whatever. But so yeah, let's get into this. So most people have seen like the visual sort of structures that we've depicted with OBC. I'm sure you see in the thumbnail there's another version of that in the image, in the sort of representation. And I also understand that the uniformity in these blocks are not representative towards what I think that the different scales of different blocks that are connected to each other are in OBC. So this is a much more cleaner, symmetrical way of viewing blocks and trying to understand them and all. But I don't think that this is, if I was to really articulate it, I actually have another image that let me pull that up. So open one of those. And I feel like this is a good representation of a block that back to my. So I feel like this is a great sort of representation of what I think it may be more like, as opposed to the uniformity. If you look in this image, you see that there are blocks that kind of overlap into other blocks and blocks that don't seem to have like complete three-dimensional boundary definitions, right? You got this block down here that seems to be connected throughout the bottom, but it's like three separate blocks, but they're kind of, but they're connected, and they're playing the role of what bleed space would play, except all of this is separated by bleed space, because you see in the black lines that there's depiction of being separated by bleed space. So to me, it's like this representation, I feel like, is a far better attempt at trying to articulate this in a way that makes sense. There we go. So I feel like that is a little bit more representative. And even if you look kind of the way that it depicts it on this left side over here, you could see like it kind of overlaps, and it looks like almost like this is a flat dimension of some kind, as opposed to some sort of a cube dimension. And I'm sure there are, higher order of dimensionality block structure types that are allotted in the meta nature geometry of that block. So there's that too. But ultimately, this is my closer representation. Still kind of the Rubik's Cube visualization, but it still is more ununiform and scaled a little bit more disproportionately towards each other, and I like that. I think that's far more accurate. All right. All right, any questions about that? Are we So one of the other questions that I tend to get when it comes to, oh wow, I can't believe how much of this. One of the questions that I get often when it comes to OBC is the concept of gods, right? And we kind of discussed this a little bit before in our kind of first conversation about creationism and how it would be allowed in OBC as per the meta nature constitution of ontological definitions and values. So depending on the order and depending on the signal flow is where you're going to get your gods, or you're going to get your invalidation of gods, or at least a much more difficult path to travel to godhood than just being initiated that way during the establishment of that block's ontological values and definition. So you kind of get the notion of like the notion of apex entities being native to their block and being not only the originator of their block, but their block's original meta nature range, allowing for them to be the apex entity of that block, is also an interesting perspective on that. But they don't behave in the way that we have defined gods. There's this sort of idea that gods are the creators, and the way that they create out of nothingness, right? Even that concept, because we can kind of talk about that for a second. It's the concept of gods creating from nothingness, right? Even if I believed in a god, at least in the sense of human definitions of creator gods, I wouldn't think that this being would create from nothingness. And I don't think that is a sound argument for a god. Now, whether you believe in a god or not, it's irrelevant, right? That's not the purpose of this conversation. And I'm not trying to turn this into a, atheist bash theism sort of video. I'm just simply saying that if I was a theist, my theism's range of logic would not, it wouldn't go into the place where it's inconsistent with the being that I am proclaiming that I believe in, right? So one of the things I've always said about religion, monotheism, is that they give the gods ontological values that aren't necessary. They give him abilities that, in my opinion, he doesn't need to be, quote unquote, God. I don't think this being needs to be all powerful. I don't think he needs to be able to lift a rock so big or create a rock so big he can't lift it, right? But they will kind of try to explain that by saying, well, no, you don't understand. He is all powerful. And meaning, if he is all powerful, or it is all powerful, then this being can defy logic and can defy reason. And okay, that's totally fine. That is not a being that I would subscribe to. And I think they lose people in their pitch when they are trying to sell something that is all powerful, when to be the apex entity, you are, at least in OBC, you're not going to be all powerful. In fact, you're just somewhere in the middle on the totem pole, in the ontological stack, in existential hierarchy of beings. You are, I don't know, upper middle management, maybe. You might be middle management if you're an apex entity. And that's not a knock. I mean, a middle management, they good money, good salary, stability, So I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying the assumption of omnipotence, where my eyes tend to kind of roll over into now you're trying to sell me something, Interesting note here. There are realities in the blocks that require no external catalyst via an apex entity for manifestation. So like, you can have a situation in OBC where one block allows for a god to be self-created and existing for all time, forever, in that block's sort of meta nature makeup. And then there are others, and we kind of talked about this in the OBC discussion. I don't know if you guys are following in the Discord. We have an OBC chat, but that's always a good place for some good OBC conversation. But these apex entities in these particular blocks, the reason that they don't need a reason or a cause, and it's perfectly logical that they don't need a reason or a cause, is because, at least in the OBC model, they were allowed to define whatever truth and false and real and fiction they wanted to define, because they were essentially the first one to the control panels, right? No matter if it's a primordial consciousness or it's a corporeal, baryonic, biological life form, and it ultimately reaches a stage where it can now start rewriting the underlying truths, and by extension, the falses, of a block. To me, this is godhood. Godhood is being able to rewrite the architecture of a block. But it goes back to the point I guess I was getting at, was ultimately these beings are not true creators. No apex entity, no being in the Omni can truly create, because the one thing it would never be able to create, that is the most underlying substrate, is quintessence. And if an apex entity, a multi-eternal, an ascend, a bleed space entity, if they can't create quintessence, they aren't all powerful. That means there is no omni-powerful entity in OBC, in the Omniverse. There is no god of the Omni. The highest you can get is, apex entity of your block, or a multi-eternal governing, a vicinity of blocks. But this isn't like, there's a single entity that governs the Omni. That's just not a thing. This is interesting. In some blocks, if the logic of the ontological configuration, the meta nature, prioritizes minimal quintessence, right? So if the logic of that block prioritizes minimal quintessence, and I think the real heavy lifting word in that is prioritize, right? That my question is, if you assume that priority is accounted for in the signal flow, then ultimately that prioritization, it can make or break godhood, right? So let's just assume that the meta nature is prioritized, the minimal quintessence is prioritized in the meta nature. That means that the apex entity of that block would be closer to a bleed space entity than an apex entity or a multi-eternal, because in that sort of instance, it's exalted by its minimal or near absence of quintessence in a block that prioritizes that makes that godhood. So let's see. Awesome stuff. Let's get the dead man in here real quick. Lord Entropy.
Ray of Extropia. So we meet again.
How you doing, brother?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Yep. I'm just dialing in some settings. Bear with me.
Yep.
I was in a conversation about apex entities and how they don't actually create anything. They are
Right.
much more of these beings that re-manifest and manipulate to redefine the potentiality values in quintessence. And
Right.
the one thing they can't do is create quintessence. Therefore, they can't create
Right.
potentiality. They can only be results of the potentiality.
They're using what's already there. It's the difference between creation and to make something.
Right.
You make something out of things that already exist. The term create has connotations of pulling it out of nothing, just out of nothing. And there is no null, so you're not pulling anything out of nothing.
Right. Yeah, no, the notion of the ex nihilo creation when it comes to OBC is not a thing at all.
Yeah,
because there's no instance in the Omni where null has ever been a thing. And therefore,
Right.
if it has never been a thing, you can't
How can you
create
pull
from
something
it.
from?
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
How can
you
pull
can't,
something from it?
there's no way. So, that to me has always been a problem when it comes to the creationist model of this guy can do anything, even things that aren't things. Where it's like, huh?
Right.
That's okay. I guess I'm supposed to accept that, but
Even things that aren't things.
yeah, even things that aren't things, and it's like, and I get the argument from apologists that say just because you combine a bunch of words, it doesn't invalidate God, right? Just because your human language allows you to compile words that makes the logic in your head reason out to there is no God, doesn't actually do that. You know, and that I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand the
Right.
position of it. Because in
No, I
OBC,
get
you could
that
be
too.
in that model. Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely, no, I get that too. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the times, one of the things that is used in that argument is that they appeal to the unknown. And see, and that to me is my biggest problem with it. Like, so if I'm utilizing currently our current knowledge of what we know about the nature of reality, even if it isn't much, the current understanding of things that are demonstrable, and you're pulling from the unknown, what it feels like to me is you're pulling from no, and it doesn't sound like it becomes magic, and a very unstructured magic at that. It just doesn't follow for me that what you're saying is any more valid than what I'm saying if I'm pulling from this is what we know right now. This is the sum total of the knowledge that we know right now on this topic.
Right.
I'm pulling from that, and there are models that have been experimented on, and also, and yours hasn't. Yours was it was a book that somebody wrote a long time ago that said words.
I
They're
got a book
basically doing
too.
the same thing. Right. They're doing the same thing. They're accusing you of doing, and just taking these human words and bruh, where'd you get them words from?
That's a good point.
Where'd you get them ideas from? You
I
got
didn't
them
even
ideas
realize that.
from a book from a long time ago, and I did a video years ago, not to belabor this point, but I did a video years ago about how primitive man was not stupid. They were just ignorant. And it's a difference.
Mm.
Like our ancestors were very intelligent. It's just that they lacked a certain amount of information because they didn't have the tools of observation that we have now. That's all that is. So when they write certain things, yeah, there's gonna be times you're gonna find that they wrote things that's absolutely profound, and that we find later through our observations with better tools of observations are true.
Yeah.
True in the sense that this is what we can verify,
Right.
right? But there's a lot of other stuff, right? That they written that there is literally no bearing in the reality that we see now with the tools that we use now, and some of the same science that they're scoffing at. Like this is something that we made up whole cloth is responsible for everything you use on a regular everyday basis that works.
Right,
Because if
exactly.
it
I was
didn't,
gonna say,
if
yeah,
these principles didn't work, those things wouldn't work. All right. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and to me, it seems like it they're overselling. You know,
Hmm.
they're Dolph Ziggler. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Dolph Ziggler.
I love Dolph
I'm not
Ziggler.
trying to bury Dolph, right?
He looks
But
hurt. He looks really hurt.
he you know, it's like you're trying to oversell when it's like I don't mind you selling your belief and
Yeah.
your
Yeah. Go ahead.
ideology. Like, hey, you know, always a free agent. You can always pitch me. However,
Right.
you also can't get mad that I articulate with the brain that your creator, if you so chose, existed to reason out that that being is not either A, existent, or B, something worth worshiping.
Right.
And it's like,
Right.
how does that reconcile? How does that reconcile with your logic? So to me, it goes back to the idea of the apex entity, where the apex entity was never intended to be all powerful.
Exactly. Exactly. It's viewed as all powerful by lower beings with less information, less sense of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Like these things are the equivalent in comparison to an apex entity as something that's deaf, dumb, and blind. That's the equivalent as far as awareness. They don't have that. So it's nowhere near the awareness of the apex entity. It's nowhere as capable as the apex entity. So, of course, to these lesser beings
Right.
with lesser cognitive functions, this thing will seem all powerful to it until it, in a lot of cases, apex entities will think of themselves as all powerful
Yep.
until they graduate, right? To a multi eternal, or they meet a multi eternal and they realize, nope, you were a big fish in a low pond.
Yeah, and you know that's if they don't get caught slipping by a bleed space entity, which they
Which,
can't really unmake that mistake.
yeah,
Um, so you know, we did you want to talk about the actual topic that we kind of talked about? We were going to talk about.
you can do magic.
Well, we can do magic. I'm totally down with magic. I would love to talk magic. We could do that, and we could also do meta nature, ontological order, and signal flow, creating
Okay,
realities. We could do that. So,
absolutely.
um, the thing about magic that I think that we've done well is that the thing about OBC is that definitions that are block specific cannot be applied to other blocks.
Right,
And there
right.
may be similar blocks, but there there isn't like one block with there isn't one block with a monopoly on truth in any kind of way.
Right, right.
There is no block with monopoly on magic in the way that it is defined. And so
Mhm,
the way that you have to define things in OBC really comes from a block agnostic perspective. So magic
mhm.
has to be defined block agnostically. And so how do
Right.
we do this, right? So the definition that we came up with, and there's several things we have to consider when we talk about magic and sorcery in OBC. We've got to talk about consciousness, right?
Mhm,
We've got to talk about quintessence, right? Um, you know, we got to talk about potentiality,
mhm.
right? We have to talk about, you know, other things that really could be considered block specific, but only in the context of if we're speaking specifically about those blocks. In most cases, we can kind of have a block agnostic definition of magic if we have a universal understanding of what logic and reason is supposed to be, and then
Mhm.
apply that and say, if you're able to achieve these things without doing it from a reasonable or a logical way, that is essentially magic. right?
Right.
I haven't read the definition
Right.
yet for you guys. I just wanted to preface it because I wanted to understand like I wanted everybody's understanding as to where we were coming from with our definitions. All of our definitions are block agnostic. So magic in this reality is not magic in that reality, but it is based on, first of all, truth paradox, but also
Mhm.
this specific definition of what magic actually is. So I'm going to pull up real quick the actual definition. So magic, magic at an omniversal level is defined like this. Magic as an illogical to block construct logic phenomenon remains consistent across all blocks where it exists. In those blocks, it is defined as a process that manipulates Q in ways that defy the internal logic and scientific principles of that governing block. So the internal logic of the scientific principles governing that block is the logic of that block. It's the science of that block. It's what makes sense to the materialists of that block, right?
Right.
These actions defy that logic. And so by that logic, it makes it inherently magic. This makes magic universally understood as a deviation from the expected natural laws within any given reality block to affect quintessence. So you can have magic in a reality where the primary sort of invocation of quintessence and potentiality is done through magic. But inherently in that reality, they're doing something that's illogical and unreasonable to the logic of that reality, to the ontological values that have been set up. That is completely illogical. But there are underlying truths of the omni that allows make that possible.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the examples I gave the other day when we were talking about it was that, say there is a magic user in any given block, and say that pigs exist in that block, right? Say that the concept of flight also exists within that block. But in this block, pigs don't fly. And then the sorcerer, the magician, casts a spell, and all of a sudden the pig is flying. So to the denizens of that block, they're like, whoa, this is magic. He just made a pig fly. He did, but he did not create the concept of flight, nor did he create a pig. He literally used the strings and pulleys of the things that are already there inside that block to put these things together. And this seems completely illogical to the denizens of the block that are watching it. Like, 'cause pigs don't fly, right? But he didn't create anything out of that. He just literally manipulated the quintessence of concepts that were already there.
Well said. Yeah, well said. That goes back to the idea of, doing things from the perspective of null, which is not a thing in OBC. You are ultimately always interacting with quintessence as quintessence and of quintessence, because the entire omni is a amalgam of configurations of this immaterial substrate of potentiality. So magic allows, because the meta nature of some block allow for the sort of underlying illogical invocations of potentiality, right? You have realities where magic is a thing. The concept of supernatural is a block specific phenomenon that is fundamentally tied to all nonlinear manipulations of quintessence. So any nonlinear manipulation of quintessence is considered illogical and thus magical. That could be, inverse manipulation of quintessence, some sort of other abstract, nonlinear way of doing it with consciousness, because we talked about how consciousness is important in this, right? Consciousness being, and we haven't really talked about consciousness yet, but being a particular type of configuration that in that reality block is allotted awareness, a type of awareness. Now, where awareness falls on the ontological hierarchy or order in the Omni, it depends on that being. But
Right.
consciousness produces the awareness that allows agency to act upon with the quintessence that would basically allow for the magic of these realities, regardless of the linearity of how the meta nature is defined. Wow, that was a lot. that was a lot. Would some forms of magic rely on quintessence inversion? Oh no, I mean quintessence inversion can be achieved through magic or technology. So you can get that through Gray's unification science, or you can get that through, Merlin's magic.
Right.
If you're in a reality that allows for that. You could be in a reality where no matter what science you do, it all leads to wrong answers because the apex entity of that reality just decided to code that into the true and false potentiality.
Yep.
So there's nothing you could do to articulate what the real base reality actually is.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Interesting to think about.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about.
Another aspect about Honey Dragon says OBC is so damn amazing. I'd like to think so as well. I think my tag team partner thinks so as well. It is very fascinating as a concept and as a model, and that's why I said on the onset, just it's not. I don't want people to try to invalidate it as something real. Just explore it and enjoy it for yourself. What were you about to say?
Yeah, I was about to say it has great explanatory power for this. Like I said, especially with fiction. Like I don't care. You can go grab any work of fiction.
Keep going.
You can grab any work of fiction. You will find that you can, even at the point where it's at now, we're at OBC 5.94 version. You will find an explanation in there that OBC can be used for. And I've done this with other comic books. I've done this with other works of fiction, like even like video game works of fiction, like Skyrim, right? Like you'll find some sort of explanation in here. And the crazy thing is, we're not done with it. We still got more to add to it. Even the magic section is not completely finished because there are things that we have to apply to it or apply it to. Like with deities, how they utilize magic, how in some universes, some realities, I should say, there is technology that can literally do the exact same thing, right? So there's just a wealth of explanatory power with OBC. I think you're muted, sir.
My bad. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm sure I was muted on the stream too because I have both the mutes tied together. I appreciate you covering me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, you could really explain anything with it.
Yeah. Take any work of fiction you like, whatever that concept is in there. In fact, let's call that the OBC challenge.
Ooh, right? I love that.
Challenge.
OBC challenge. Explain anything through OBC. Take a work of fiction and be like, how do you get to this point with OBC? And you'd have to reverse engineer the reality.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. You would have to first take the time out to really examine the reality that you're talking about in this work of fiction. Really examine how things work there. And then you take certain properties of that reality and you just apply it. Like if that reality has magic users there, or we have a magic section, see how the way they utilize magic, because I'm telling you, things being block specific really covers a lot. Like interblock dynamics really covers a lot. It really does.
Yeah. Interblock dynamics covers a lot. Intra-block dynamics covers a lot. I feel like intra-block dynamics, when you start talking about how a reality's nature is decided.
Right. Right.
Like you get into some really philosophical, deep philosophical. Like I feel like OBC is the final boss for philosophy. At least the concept of omni, right? The concept of omni. And I read the Ormu Field story last night to a couple of the Giannis Leth guys. And shout out to Bo Flexus TXI. But we were in a chat, we were house chat, and we were talking about just OBC. They humored me with 10 minutes because they know 10 minutes for me will become 100 minutes. But I read this story to them about Ormu Field and how, you know, he spent his whole life chasing this sort of concept. And in the end, you realize that for all the great thinkers in the world, there's one concept, whether you are a theist, you're an atheist, materialist, spiritualist, dualist, whatever. The concept of all is fascinating. It is the most fascinating thing I can ever think about. Gods, most sciences pale in comparison to the interest in the concept of all. Because there's so much potentiality and variability in the concept of all that shit, you can get anywhere from here through all. Like that just concept is what makes OBC possible. And you take those two major components, which is potential and the concept of all, those are the parents of OBC.
Yeah. Yeah. Discord, he says, I feel like the Snap Infinity Stones thing, I feel like they would qualify as a magical artifact. Yeah, it would be actually like it would be an Apex artifact in the Marvel universe. That's literally the thing that overrides everything else. Right? That artifact overrides all other artifacts, and at least in the Marvel universe.
Yeah,
like because the way they do it, even they have deities in the Marvel block. There are deities there, very powerful deities too, depending on which tier of deity you're talking about. They have the ability to empower things like objects, either organic or inorganic, right? So they take Odin. Odin, he placed power into Mjolnir, right? Thor's hammer. The gauntlets override the hammer, right? They override whatever the hammer can do, just for the simple fact that they have a stone that controls literally the reality of the block. So it would be that I'm sitting there trying to think of another device, artifact, or whatever that is part of that block that overrides the Infinity Gauntlet, and I can't think of one.
So
Those collection of gems.
So it's interesting you say that because we kind of had this conversation, at least proto version of this conversation, when we were talking about how far out does the boundary of an Apex item extend? And that's where you define your boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Your meta nature boundaries. Because people ask me all the time, they're like, well, how do you define the boundaries of these blocks? Like, what if I'm doing a nested reality and, you know, inside that reality, there's a simulation of a guy who's writing a story of a person who's coding a simulation of a person who's playing a video game where they're a person who thinks they're in a simulation, but they're really not. They're actually a person who's coding this game called The Matrix. And, you know, so it's like, where are the definitive borders? And we actually define in OBC block borders. Like this is a thing that we've spent time actually defining, but not getting into that. The definition, the easy answer is wherever an Apex item's effect range ends.
That's literally the answer to that. And even in the Marvel block, they've actually addressed that. Even within their block multiverse, the multiverse within their block, it doesn't work in other The gems have to come because they are intrinsically linked to the properties of that universe. Those gems come from it's a condensed it's like condensed uh it's the all the properties of that universe, the various different properties of that universe that make it go
Hmm.
condensed in gems. So it only has the effect in that little block of their multiverse, that one little part of their multiverse. If you take an infinity gauntlet from one reality to the next reality, it does not work.
At all?
It doesn't work at all.
None
As a
of the
matter of fact,
stones?
none of them. As a matter of fact, they actually Darkseid got his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet before, and it
From
didn't work.
DC?
Yes, and it didn't work. It was a crossover, and it didn't work over there. It's a
Oh, okay.
completely different reality. It doesn't control the fabric of that reality over. It doesn't pull the strings of that reality because that is a separate block,
Right.
right?
Different
It doesn't control it.
different meta
Diff-
nature.
different meta nature. I think what I would use OBC to explain in the cases where there are artifacts that could work across realities is that the variation of that other reality that it works in is so close to the one that the native one of that artifact that it does allow it to do certain things over there. I would still argue it wouldn't be at full power because whatever the variation difference is, um, that would be the thing that would affect how much it could control. So if it's super close, say that one reality is 99.9% similar to the native reality that artifact came from. That point one, that's enough to block something
Mm.
that it can't do there. That would be my argument.
Yeah. Well, and the real issue is that Apex item within the margin of compatibility to where it's near full strength. We like I agree with you. That 0.1% you just said is going to invalidate it being an Apex item because the
Right.
equivalent item in that reality that's the same thing but's
Exactly.
native to that reality is always going to have the advantage because it doesn't have the ontological 0.000 whatever what variant of
Right.
difference
Right.
in
Right.
the definition. So you kind of have a situation where the native the apex artifact that's native to that block is always going to be that the trump card over any. If
The
you
trump
come
card.
into that reality with other technology and other magic, you may fall into the margin of compatibility where it's still pretty powerful, right? We've seen that even in the comics in Extropy and Entropy.
Yep.
Gray and Malik go to the
Absolutely.
G universe, right? Different block from the abstract, different rules, but they still have some powers. Malik's still
Exactly.
displaying some entropic force energy, right? Chest
Right.
plate's
Right.
deactivated or at least lesser activated, so it's not as
Right.
much, but there is a distinct amount that he still has, and he still has the
Right.
ability to affect entropy in a way that allows him to
Right.
do magic, basically.
Right, because that's basically what it is. Disco said it sounds like sentient objects possess blades, etc., would have the same consciousness, potentiality / quintessence value as a living being. I think that would depend on if you mean going from one block to the next. That would depend on if that block allows for objects to be possessed. That it may literally not be a thing in that next block. May not be a thing.
That's a good point. The idea of, you know, what if, and we are just getting into this sort of definitive area about souls.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what if you don't even have the ability to have possessions in your
Have us.
reality because the way that minds and bodies work aren't vessels you can just invade?
Oh shit. Is it possible that this sort of object that was possessed in its native reality goes to a different reality where that is disallowed according to the logic of that block, and it severs the connection between whatever consciousness has been fused with the item and the item? What happens then to that consciousness?
Ooh. And this is a reality that that this artifact, this item, this possessed weapon is going into that doesn't allow for souls or consciousness.
No, it allows for consciousnesses.
Yeah.
It allows for souls. What it doesn't allow for is the fusion of consciousness into an object, or like possession. It doesn't allow for that in that block. So
Then
as
the
soon as you go on the block, it
consciousness is
severs the
separated
connection.
or severs it. So what do you do? Do you sever it or separate it?
It depends, because like let's say you sever it. Does that kill the consciousness instantly?
I think it's
Is this
interesting.
reality? Right? Right?
So what happens if you Tuvix this situation? Right? Okay, this is a great fucking story. Holy shit. Okay. So you go from one block to another, and you're an entity in possession of a possessed item, or an item with a consciousness. Your sword is alive, your hammer is alive, something is, it has a consciousness. It can act on its own with its own agency, right? You go into this reality. There is a compatibility consequence because of this underlying truth. Well, the consciousness and the artifact are separated into a person and an item that has normally been used as a singular item, as a tool. Now,
that's crazy.
Does the person who owned the item own the new person?
Where is the person?
Because, well, I'm going to assume that the consciousness, I'm saying consciousness is the person. But like, if you're separating the consciousness from the item, I'm assuming it will take some sort of a physicalized form in that reality block.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the item would take a form, and I'm assuming the consciousness would take a physical form.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. So if it's a sword, maybe the item is just the sword, and the consciousness becomes a person.
Right. Right.
And so the owner of the sword, who owned that sword before it became two entities, one sentient and one non. Like,
I would imagine that whatever is the entity that fused the two together, if it's not in that block along with the item, I think it probably loses connection, like, to both. Like say for instance, Doctor Strange fused the consciousness into an apple. Right?
Oh, we got a better example. His cape is conscious.
His cape is conscious, it's sentient, right? So if that cape goes through an existential tunnel, goes into a reality that the logic disallows for that sort of fusion of sentience with this object, this cape, and it separates the two. And let's say that consciousness is automatically formed using the physical body is automatically formed using the elements of that block to form a compatible body. Does Doctor Strange still have control over that consciousness or that cape? I would argue no. If Doctor Strange is in another block, the original block, and they're over there in this other block, nah. I would argue that the consciousness has autonomy, full autonomy.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And not only does the consciousness have full autonomy, the cape becoming a person, but if Doctor Strange in this example was to say, okay, we're getting ready to ring portal into another block of the Omni, and you have to now retake your, we call this the Tuvix if you've never seen Voyager. What do you do now with a two personality entity or two component entity that used to be a one component entity? Now in Star Trek, and obviously spoiler alert if you haven't seen this episode, I mean it's 25 years old, I'm sorry, but in the Tuvix episode, right, they had Tuvok and Neelix fused into one person, and then they had to Janeway had to make the sole decision to separate the beings. Even though Tuvix pleaded for his life, he was like, no, I want to live. Like, I'm this new being. I can't help that I was brought into life by your accident.
This way,
but I'm here now. And there's you want to start an argument in Trekkie lore, go to a Star Trek convention and say Janeway was right. Like, You want to start just an argument right then and there. Hell, Kate Mulgrew could be on stage talking while you do this, and it will stop the middle, and she will just go, "Oh, good Lord!" Like she will, because it's such a thing. Every captain has their thing, right?
Yes, true.
With look, maybe I don't know enough about TOS to know about Kirk's thing, but I'm sure he has one. Picard has Wolf 359. Cisco he brought the Romulans into the war against the Dominion. Janeway has Tuvix, right?
Right.
Archer has the Temporal War and everything he had to do in that. Like, so most of the captains have their cross to bear as like, yo, you were a great captain, but you also have this one thing that everyone will look down on.
You got this bad bone on you right here.
Yeah.
This one thing. Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's a great example. I mean, I feel like I agree with you, man. Full autonomy, and if the Cape doesn't want to go because it knows that if it leaves this reality block, it now becomes an object again with a consciousness, and it likes having a body and agency, and it doesn't want to go to any reality that's going to refuse it. Does Doctor Strange have the Janeway, the moral Janeway right to say no? Because you were this, you must return to this. Because you were a slave, you must return to slavery.
I think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think he has the right to do that, especially because morality, which we do not have a section in there, that would be block independent too, to a certain degree, right? So
right,
it would be block dependent. So whatever your right was over there in that native block, I don't mean is that same shit here. It could be, but that's not what it means. Right. And even if it does, I think the newly independent consciousness has a right to choose at that point. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah,
they have a right to choose.
I agree with you. I think that not only do they have a right to choose, but I also think, and this may not be a popular opinion, hot take, if they choose to return back to their form of a unionized sort of two component into one component life form, I don't think that's a morally bad decision. I don't think they're choosing slavery either. I think they are choosing what they were as well. And so, morality is block specific. And I'm sure there are some grotesque realities out there where the morality is fucked up that you just would never want to be there ever.
Right.
So I'm sure there are blocks that have, realities where the Cape will return back to being a sentient Cape and not be two people.
And it might have very good reason for that. Like, we don't know the bond that the Cape had. We do know in the movies, the Cape seemed to always defend Strange, put itself at risk for Strange. It might literally fuck with him. So there could be an issue that it left to solve and needs to come back in order to, maybe it needed some sort of information or whatever. It needed to bring it back. And if it didn't, maybe something bad happens back there. So it might make the decision, I don't want to see anything bad happen back there. So I'm going back there with the mission with finishing the mission that I was sent over there for. I'm going back to finish it because I don't want anything bad happen over there, because that's all I've ever known.
Right. Exactly.
That is all I've ever known.
That's still home. That's still
home.
And so again, you have to, agents, people who are free, conscious agents should be able to choose, even if that choice is doomed for themselves or some sort of unpositive outcome or negative outcome, as long as it doesn't affect, other people. Hey man, if you want to choose to destroy your body doing risky stunts and stuff like that, and it's just you, okay. I mean, I'm not going to try to stop you. I'm just going to make it to where the collateral damage doesn't include other people, the other consciousnesses,
It does beg another question.
What's up?
I forget the neurologist, neuroscientist's name, but I watched quite a few videos with him debating other people on the concept of free will, and how in his mind it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
That's interesting
because of the way our brains are set up.
Yeah.
there's certain conditioning that we all undergo, and it does have an influence on. For instance, the idea of home is influenced by where you live. You live there for a long period of time. It's built familiarity and it's similar to you. That's why it feels like home. That's why, because you were there. The conditions, the environmental conditions there, imprinted on your brain at a developmental stage. So it will always feel like home to you, um, theoretically. Now, I would argue that in that specific case, not necessarily, because take Baltimore. I was born and raised in Baltimore and lived there much of my adult life, right? It doesn't feel like home to me anymore.
Mm.
I've been gone, not living there long enough where Baltimore doesn't feel like home to me anymore. However way you define home, that feeling, because I'm not sure if we've accurately defined that either, but however way you define that, it doesn't feel like that for me anymore. What feels like home for me is right where I'm at right now. And I think that too can change. When I move out of the country, go someplace else, and I'm there long enough and familiar with the environment, comfortable in the environment, that's gonna feel like home. And I will refer to it as home when I'm outside of that house. Like
Yeah.
if I'm taking a walk along the Cinta Costera and my condo is a little further down, maybe in Punta Pacifica. When I talk to somebody there, go, yeah, it's about time for me to go home. I'm not talking about back to the States. I'm talking about back to my condo in
Right.
Punta Pacifica.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting because what that really makes me think of is that an entity that goes from one block to another may not be from that block, but could easily make that block home
Yeah.
if exposed enough to it, right? I don't even know what the likelihood of it going back to a reality is. Like, what is the likelihood of you winning the lottery twice in a row?
It depends on how you got to that one reality. Like if that was via technology and you had technology that factored in a return, then it's possible you should be able to go back to that
Ooh,
reality.
I do like that, actually.
You know?
If the first time was random or an accident, and the second time
Yeah, if the first time was random, winning that lottery the second time to go back, it's gonna have to be some tech or magic or something.
But that's a great
You know?
story. I feel like that is
Yeah.
something that that's actually pretty good. But to your point, when it comes to like the ethical and the ethical complexities of what you're talking about, I mean, we know and we've established that each reality is going to have its own moral compass. Morality can be grossly defined in one and, incredibly defined in another, and everything in between those two poles. But I will say that there will be instances where you may be compatible physiologically and ontologically with a block, but you may not be compatible with the moral compass of that block.
Right.
Right.
And that's going to affect how you feel about whether you stay there. 100% is.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Think of the morality in the mirror universe of Star Trek. Right? Everybody's got a goatee. They're slapping people. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I come from that block.
Yeah. You literally got a goatee. You're slapping people. Like, at the end of the day, that morality, you don't want to live in that morality full time.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
So I feel like if you take that as some sort of an analogy towards a reality you get stuck in where, yeah, I'm physiologically compatible, but morally, this place is a shithole. They're eating people over here and calling it lunch.
Yeah. Right. I can't.
They're eating
To be
kelpie.
honest with you, I wouldn't want to live full time in the Marvel or DC block.
Oh, yeah.
Bro, the shit that I have read the average person gets mollywopped over there. Like,
yeah.
all of a sudden, some raging, mutated thing is running through your town and you just trying to get home after work. And now you can't because they didn't block the streets off. This motherfucker's throwing cars and knocking down buildings. And the next thing you know, here comes the heroes. And in the process of trying to take this thing down, there's all kinds of collateral damage. You finally are able to get home and realize your home isn't there anymore because
Right.
that was part of the collapse. No,
Because
yo,
Hulk fell on
would you
it.
want to live in? Would you want to live in any reality where the Joker? No,
No.
I just read a Joker centric issue. He is a nightmare. No,
You know
no.
what's crazy about that? How anybody would live in Gotham after the whole superhero, supervillain sort
Oh,
of thing.
sheesh,
It's
yeah,
like, I
yeah,
understand
yeah.
people are poor, but New York is still super expensive. You can go find a place in North Carolina. Get out of here. I ain't trying to hear that. You're living
Well, you know
in
now Gotham is
Gotham.
New Jersey now.
Oh, is it?
Gotham's New Jersey now.
No, it's
Yeah,
not.
Gotham's New Jersey. Yep, yep. Gotham's New Jersey. Metropolis is New York. So it's right over the
What?
river. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, that's
Yep.
such
Yep.
butt, dog. I actually
Yep.
liked it when like Metropolis was like Chicago.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
and
did too.
Gotham was New York, and they were so far away from each other. Wait a minute, how is that even canon?
See, well, it's canon for the movies. I don't know if they changed it in the books, but in the movies, but when you go see Superman versus Batman, literally, Metropolis is New York City
No way.
and Gotham is New Jersey. It's right over the river, right over the river, right over there. And what's crazy about that is because this is something that I think is a plot. It's a plot hole that DC has never fixed. Superman in one night could end all of Batman's playtime. In one night, he could go through Gotham and put a stop to all of these villains that Batman has on retainer over there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He could just fly. He could just fly through. See through. Oh, they right there. Here, there. Hear the heartbeats. Ah, that's the Joker's heartbeat. I'm gonna have. But stop that real fast. Oh, that's Killer Croc. Killer Croc is a big fucking deal to Batman. He is not a big deal to Superman. Right? He's not. You know what I'm saying? Like Superman come and slap his ass up real quick, send him about his business. You know what I'm saying? The fact that Superman doesn't do that, they say, some of the arguments I've heard, is that he doesn't do that because he doesn't want to do that to Batman. He doesn't want to, shame Batman. I'm like, that's horseshit. Superman is about saving lives. It is some horrific shit that be happening over there in Gotham. There is no way, especially if the cities are actually as close as if they're as close in the comic book as they are in the movies,
Yeah.
he can hear all the shit that's happening over there, bro. He's in Metropolis, he can hear it. He's been in orbit and can literally hear what's voices calling out to him on Earth. He can hear this monstrous shit happening. And he ain't gonna go over there? I don't buy it. That's not in his personality type. It's not his
See,
personality type.
I call BS on the idea that that's even possible from Soups, because if that's the case, then why not do it in Metropolis? Why couldn't he just see through all the buildings and get all the criminals out of Metropolis? Metropolis
I'm gonna
still
tell
has
you why.
crime.
We're dealing with also scale of criminal. Batman's like Penguin. Take Penguin. If Penguin hits Superman with that umbrella, what do you think's gonna happen?
Nothing.
Not gonna do nothing.
I mean, Penguin's
right?
gonna die
But if
of a heart attack.
Metallo,
Yeah.
facts. But if Metallo hits Superman, he gonna feel that. Superman's gonna feel that.
So you're saying
The
that
scale.
Batman is not holding the actual title of WWE champion, and he's holding that like workers secondary championship,
What I'm saying to
the
you is,
Gunther championship.
it is entirely possible that Batman is not even real, even in the DC universe. It's entirely possible that Batman is some dude in Arkham Asylum fantasizing for his inmates, his fellow
Oh,
inmates.
yeah.
I'm just saying, it's possible.
I
It's possible.
I mean, the thing about DC is that they their whole mythos, not mythos, but their brand of storytelling is set upon Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman always having these just crazy advantages and everything, and then trying to make the story interesting about why they're struggling against people. But we know Wonder Woman is half god. We know Superman is a god on Earth, and we know Batman is the greatest detective the world has ever seen.
He literally has more money than God. So
yeah. Exactly. Like, he is literally infinite money. So
like, that's a superpower. I don't care what nobody say. That's a superpower. It is.
And you know how he did it? Here's how you explain how Batman has so much money. Batman figured out a way
that's interesting.
To existentially tunnel to a reality where he could pull from an even greater Wayne treasure chest and just take the money into his Gotham, and it's so similar that it passes all of the counterfeit measures. And so he's able to basically launder money from reality block to reality block. That's a great story, actually.
That is a great story. What if he quantumly entangles the digital money, like the money from that other reality, that other Bruce Wayne that has like all this?
Oh yeah,
it's
Apex Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. So every time that money goes up over there, it goes
over here in this reality. That'd be nuts, actually. I love the idea of technology across blocks or magic spells across blocks that are instantaneously connected, like entangled and shit. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yo, Discord is funny.
Yeah.
He said Omniversal blockchain Cosmology.
That's dope. Yeah.
Yo, that's funny.
That's actually a great story.
I love it.
Like, I love that.
It is. I love it.
I might write that story, dog. Let's write that story, Discord.
Now the question is though, while Superman does have godlike abilities, let's run him really quick through OBC. So if his species is not born special, at least in their home environment. In their home environment, they're as vulnerable to everything the way a human is on Earth. According to the lore, it's the yellow sun, right? His people lived under a red sun. When he went to Earth, he went under a yellow sun, and that sun powered his alien cells. That's what charges him up. So he starts out, I would argue he starts off at the bottom of the hierarchy of beings. His species starts off at the bottom.
Okay.
Now it depends on which version of Kryptonians, because there are some versions of Kryptonians that have a bunch of tech that's crazy, but I've always had an issue with that because so y'all ain't save yourselves from the explode. Like it seems to me, depending on what type, whatever you were, y'all could have saved yourselves from the explosion by just leaving. Like,
right. Yeah.
Spaceships bounce. Right.
And they didn't.
So I've always had it, and they didn't. And all they could do was put together two funky spaceships, one for Superboy and one for Supergirl. That's it. I put together two little funky. But those stories were written at a different time.
Yeah.
At a different time. And it's hard now to retcon a lot of that shit because it becomes iconic to the character, right?
Right.
But I've always took issue with that part of it. Like, yo, y'all have always presented Kryptonians as these type, at the very least, type 2. Or bordering type 2, at the very least.
They were technologically advanced enough to send a pod with a baby inside across space, and the baby survived. So if that's not technologically capable, I don't know what is.
I don't know what is, bro.
Where he would be, two babies, right? Supergirl and him.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. How do they explain how Superman got there, 70 years before Supergirl, but they look the same age?
Was it 70?
I don't know. Maybe it's like 40 years or something.
But
yeah, Supergirl got there way later, right?
Yeah, because he was a baby and she was a teenager when they went off.
Okay. See, I didn't know.
He made it to Earth first, and he grew up there. She was still in stasis in the ship, so I guess it kept her bio functions at that age. Okay. So when she gets to Earth, she's still a teenager. He's a grown-ass man.
Okay.
Probably in his early 30s at that
makes sense. That makes sense. So he's unenhanced biology? Is that what that is? He starts off as unenhanced. Okay.
He starts off as unenhanced biology, then he comes to Earth, right? So he becomes enhanced, superpowered. It's not
So
artificial intelligence.
so
It's not.
here's the issue I have with that though. Is
Mhm.
he super powered because he's on Earth, or is he actually super powered? Because if he's an
Well, that's a
unenhanced
good question.
biology and he's just on
Mhm.
a planet that the circumstances of that planet make him like a super powered biology,
It enhances him, right?
it enhances him, but I don't know if that enhances it elevates his class. He may be at the upper end, the upper ceiling end of unenhanced biology, but maybe enhanced biology is like some sort of a magic spell or a basic technology that gives you some sort of advantage. It may not be able to kill a soups because it scales. So the floor of the enhanced probably gets washed by the ceiling of the unenhanced biology if that unenhanced biology
Interesting.
has the experience to be able to just crush this thing, right? So
And also
they're so
basic
close.
power. There are demigods and demons that Superman would beat the shit out of.
Right. That's what I yep,
Would
totally
beat the
right.
shit out of them. You know what I'm saying?
Totally right.
So it's that's why I like the idea of scale even within the hierarchy. There's scale. So like you said, the high end unenhanced biology.
Hmm.
But the problem is by definition when he went to that planet he became enhanced. That's the problem.
Yeah.
When he goes to Earth, he becomes enhanced. When he starts absorbing that solar energy, he becomes enhanced.
Hmm.
So, and he's arguably the strongest thing in that particular block. He's probably the strongest
Physically.
of that physically of that type
Yeah.
of the enhanced. He's probably the strongest. I can't think. There are beings that can match him,
Yeah.
but some of his top feats, like when he sun dips, that last sun dip shit he did, where he dipped through like 10 of them motherfuckers and then flew from one end of the universe to the other and punched them on the yo, that's insane.
That's
That's
pretty dope.
insanity.
That sounds like
That,
a
that-
pretty high level being right there. That sounds
it
like an
does.
elemental being. That sounds like a demigod. But here's the thing. We are legitimately having a conversation as to where to put soups. And right now
Right.
we haven't evolved past because he's subject
Nope.
to even basic magic, right? Basic
Yes.
magic,
Yes.
low sorcery, he is
Mhm.
subject to and vulnerable to. So this you're talking about a
Yeah.
being that can sun dip, but if he goes to a block where magic is priority, the smallest, lowliest mage will come up and straight, pimp slap, soups like Darkseid would or like Doomsday would, right? So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
got a little, mage that's level 2 or level 3 and Superman's this like super high powered enhanced super powered biology and he still gets
Mhm.
smacked around because magic is magic and Superman is still super.
We've seen examples. Mr. Mixel
Hmm.
has been smacking Superman around physically for years.
Yeah.
Superman always has to outsmart him because it ain't the physical. Nah, because where he sits where Mr. Mixapitalik sits on the hierarchy list, when he goes to their reality,
He's Apex.
Superman is there. Superman is small. Superman is
Hmm.
small.
Yeah.
He's small.
So how does that work if Mr. Mixopedalich is he a normal being in his reality or was he born enhanced in some way? Is he some sort of an
I think that's just normal like he's like a fifth dimensional
imp?
being, I
Yeah.
believe, imp.
Yeah.
And there are other beings there that I think are more powerful than he is. So for there, for where he's from, he's probably regular weed and shit.
Ah,
But coming when he goes to the lower dimensional vibration of where Superman lives at, it's he can see the strings. He can see the strings and the pulleys of that reality. That's why he's able to do all that shit. He can see shit that the people that come from that block, most of them, the vast majority of them, can't see. It's like you are a three-dimensional being. You have more of awareness than a two-dimensional being. Just you see more certain things this two-dimensional being just can't see. can't perceive.
Right.
You can perceive it because you're 3-dimensional. He's 5th dimensional.
Right.
So he's,
seeing from
pulling,
angles, and pulling from stuff.
Yeah.
That's crazy. No, that's totally right. Let's see here. Oh, whoops. All right. A couple of other things before we get off stream and do some behind the scenes stuff. I find that when we're trying to define apex entities and God tier beings, like in most religious debates, things break down at the definition, because you're talking about something that inherently is not supposed to be able to be described. And yet, in OBC, we've created hierarchies of beings that are well above what the human finite conception of a deity or an apex entity would be. In which we even articulate that you can have a plurality of apex of entities if the ontological value of that block defines it to be so. Oh, did I lose you? Oh no, you. Yeah, there's an element of chance and just permutation randomness that is going to decide whether that reality will allow for one original primordial consciousness or multiple.
Right.
And then that will decide if there's a monotheistic supreme consciousness or a polytheistic collection of consciousness that maybe have sections of the reality for their domain, and they don't interfere with each other because they understand like there's nothing we can do. It's always a stalemate. I can't kill you, you can't kill me, so let's just leave each other alone. Yeah, you could do what you want in your reality, I'll do what I want in my reality, but we will never interact with each other ever again.
Right. Or it could be a case of a divine tribe. Maybe these beings developed in multitude. It wasn't one now and then another one came along. No. They developed in a multitude from the earliest beginnings of that block. And there may be one of them that's a bit more powerful than the other, and maybe that would be the apex dude. But they are all pretty much similar in scope, and they divvy up the responsibilities of maintaining that block. So that's where you get the deities of different things: the god of war, the god of this, the god of that, the god of that. They divvy up the responsibility, god of death. Or it could be one being that was formed at near the beginning of that block, and he creates other beings that are very powerful, but not him or her. They ain't him or her. They're very powerful, but him and her. And they're just lesser deities or whatever, lesser deities to the lower, as they start creating lower life forms and all of this, to those life forms, even the lesser deities are these impressive things, but to that apex, no, I made them.
Right.
I made them too.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the when people argue from the monotheistic, perspective of like the monad or just the singular source from which all things are, emerge. I understand that. I feel like I don't articulate that being has consciousness, so therefore that's where I would diverge. The idea that this being has a will and all that, like that's way more human than it needs to be. If you want to say
you're right.
Yeah, if you want to say it's like the source, then that's fine. But if you start adding all these human attributes, like I need will and I need worship and respect.
See, that's where it gets weird, bro.
Yeah.
That's where it gets weird to me. It's like you don't see that you're projecting onto whatever this natural phenomena is. You're projecting, you're anthropomorphizing this thing. You don't see that by saying, I need worship, I need respect, you better love me,
I have a will, I have a plan.
I have a will. You're in the mirror creating this, giving this thing these properties. You're in the mirror taking properties of yourself, placing it into that, and it's like that's where it gets weird. It's weird to me, and you can see how it distills into weirdness, because when they start making this thing so human, so arrogant, so ego driven, it's like, yo, you can't see that talking about yourself
Yeah, exactly.
right now.
Yeah.
Like, you can't see that.
This thing, how interesting how this thing has all the attributes that serve you. You know,
Isn't it?
that's interesting. Yeah, yeah.
You don't see that like that seems like very fairly obvious to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess lastly, next week we'll be back and we'll be talking about more OBC. I know there was one other question that was asked by Discord. If
Let's
you
see.
are a quantum or quintessence signature doppelganger, so your twin of a superhero, and you get thrown into their block, would you gain their powers?
Oh, bro, you just broke my. Oh man, that's a great story.
That's a great story.
That's
I'm
a
not gonna
great
lie.
premise for a story right there. That is a great premise.
OBC is the master story generator. All you have to do
it's the lore forge,
it's
bro.
the lore forge, bro. It so is. That's a great question. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. So
that's awesome.
what do you think?
Oh fuck.
I'm thinking about it too.
So I'm trying to falsify it. That's what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to falsify it. So what would be the things to prevent that?
Okay.
Now,
I don't know which part you're taking, but I'm going to take the quintessence part of this for a second.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a question. I don't know how you feel about this. How do we define a omniversal doppelganger? Is it
okay. I think it would be as Discord suggested. I think the quantum quintessence signature, is it possible for it to be identical to another's in the omniverse?
No, because quantum mechanics and quantum signatures are defined differently through the meta nature. So there's not a shared single quantum reality.
That's why I sought to falsify it first, because then it would have to be through. Would it be through another way then? Because think about it, like if another reality, say there's another block that is very similar to this one, wouldn't that also mean that there is a version of me there? What are the things that connect us? If it's not are we not connected at all? It just happens that this is one of the variations of two blocks, or is there something intrinsically about that doppelganger that connects it to me?
Okay.
Or are we just two separate people?
So the idea of separate is interesting, because I don't tend to think of, yes, separate in the context of you're talking about two entities from two reality blocks. However,
two different life experiences.
So that's how we're separating and making these distinct entities. But the quintessence, configuration, and makeup and density and the block's meta natures are so close. Why wouldn't what makes that entity a superhero there apply to that in some part?
To you. Maybe that 0.00001% that's different is the fact that in this reality, the logic permits superpowers.
Right.
So if that's the only difference, right? If that's the only difference, if you get tossed into that block, because you are and it also depends on how you got those powers. That matters too. If your doppelganger got those powers as a result of an industrial accident, you would need to go through the same industrial accident to get that when you went over there.
I was going to say, yeah, it would have to be, you would have to be naturally like that and not have to have
mutated.
Had the life story of the course of, because in that reality block, you may have the same Q configuration and signature, but you didn't have the same life experience. You didn't get hit with the radioactive goo that your mans did. So like, that's not the same thing. But if you were born with powers, right? If you're born with this ability,
if you're a meta human being type being, meta human type being, that's crazy. So that means if you somehow end up in that block, the conditions that caused your doppelganger
Have
to have these
superpowers.
abilities is gonna have you. That's crazy.
At least within the margin
And-
of compatibility of, greater than just basically compatible. Like, what is this right here? I think I have it. Nope, that's Omni hacking. It's fully compatible blocks, semi-compatible blocks. This is at least in between fully and semi, right? So
Yes,
fully
at least
compatible
between-
blocks with
yes,
high
yes.
ontological similarity allow for seamless tunneling and few ontological consequences, if any. If any. If any. Key phrase in there, if any. It could
If
essentially
any.
be so close ontologically that your power set and his power set is indistinguishable. He can run faster than the speed of train.
Exactly.
You can run faster than the speed of train.
That's
But
the speed of
to
train.
your point earlier, that 0.0001% could mean he can run faster than the speed of train, but you can only run faster than the speed and bus. It's still a
Right.
superpower, but
It's
you're
still a
not,
superpower.
you know what I mean? You're not native to that block, and there may be an
Right.
inherent, there may be always, no matter how similar the ontological block is to where you
Mhm.
come from, there's always a non-native consequence to you being in that block. You will never.
And the native version of you will always have an advantage
Yes.
in that. Yeah.
Yep.
But here's the other thing, bro. It gets deeper than that. Because your doppelganger had a different set of life experiences that created his personality than you did, he might choose to be a hero because of the events of his life that formed that personality. You could have came from some shitty stuff
Yep.
that fucked you up, and then you get over there and mentally you're gonna use those powers
Villainy.
for something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Straight
You know what I'm saying?
villainy, dog. In one reality, you're Magneto. In another, you're Professor Xavier. And you're the same
Facts.
person, right? Like,
Just saying.
yeah. I think
That's
the
that was
idea of,
ill, yo.
yeah, I agree with that. I think the margin of compatibility is going to have a lot to say about what the answer to that
Agreed.
question is to Discord's question.
Agreed.
If you want to
And
accept,
I actually like that there's an explanation for that because that'd be great in the story going forward. I love that we have an explanation for that.
oh yeah,
That margin of compatibility. I love that we had that.
yeah, me too. Because to me, there are blocks out there that would just be fully incompatible, and they should be,
Yeah.
right? Like you should
Yes.
have a massive
Yes.
consequence for going into it, because we've already seen higher order beings weaponize blocks of incompatibility.
Facts.
So if you can weaponize parts of reality, are there any ways for you to communicate with, say, another version of yourself in another block? Feel so? Oh, that was a question by a cosmic scientist, by the way.
I'm trying to think. Isn't there a part in OBC that deals with what about in a way that's omni hacking?
I think
Is there a way to omni hack that?
Yep. I would do it in a way where. So I wrote a story. This is not directly related to the story I wrote, but the story I wrote was this mathematician woman who was studying math that pointed her towards OBC, that pointed her towards the value of Omni. And while she was doing this, she discovered an equation that would allow her to swap reality blocks with equivalent size and scale reality blocks.
Oh yes.
Remember that story?
Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you can do that. Assuming you could send yourself a message in another reality block if that reality block was compatible enough, semi-compatible to fully compatible, right? I think that is more than, let's just say that value score from 1 to 10 would be like, 1 to 4 would be non-compatible, 4 to 7 would be semi-compatible, and 7 and up would be fully compatible. I would give it, there's a 6 or higher, you can probably send yourself messages to that block. Anything lower, I don't know if the logic or the message would even be coherent.
Would allow it to even,
Yeah, you're talking about like,
hey,
hey,
Sean
1
P, I
plus
see
1
what you
equals
did
3.
there. Right? Sean P, I see what you did there. I see what you did there. So maybe they would rather be an anti-hero.
That's pretty good. I actually read that in your voice too.
So did I.
So yeah, I think communicating with another block would, yeah, if it was in the margin of compatibility. Any other questions, you guys? We got like time for one more question. And then we will be cheap plug here. We will be recording the after show stuff for the Patreon listeners and stuff like that right after this.
Yep.
So that will most likely be uploaded tomorrow for our normal Friday content. Again, thank everybody who's a Patreon subscriber. We've got, I think, 137. What is it?
Good question.
All right, I'm going to do the stinger real quick. $134 patrons. So patreon.com/majestic comics. If you can contribute, we would love to have you. We love providing behind the scenes content, and me and Tombstone, we have these conversations all the time. So it's nothing just to hit record and record something for you guys, and you guys can get it behind the scene. As we develop this, we would love to keep you guys in the loop, and we have, updates that we're keeping track of and different changes that we're keeping track of as it pertains to this sort of living model, this sort of ever-changing model that we're slowly refining into a masterpiece. I mean, with your definition of magic and sorcery, bro,
I appreciate that, bro.
You killed it. Killed it.
I appreciate it.
Perfect. And I'm like, oh, doc, this is perfect. Because it was inside of what we had already established. So
that's the thing that made it amazing to me, was the fact that when I first sought to put it together, like I had already developed some stuff early on, but I wanted to make sure that anything that it was consistent with stayed, and what wasn't consistent went away. The only way to be able to do that is that there were things already in OBC. There were things already in OBC that made that workable. Yeah. That's what made it workable. And I just merely connected. Those you ever use Reasons?
Oh yeah, I used Reason, the old patch bay on the back where you had to connect
the patch bay.
Yeah.
That's what that's basically what this was. I just connected it to
that's awesome.
The parts I felt was related to that, and saw what happened. And
he patched magic and sorcery in OBC, y'all. Just let that sink in. Like, that is insanity. I want to thank everybody for joining and watching the show. Next week, we will be back for another conversation about OBC, Extropy and Entropy, and other Majestic Comics related things. So, I know we're out of here, you guys. Peace.
Peace.